Hey, welcome to Blue Dream Health Collective, where we talk about real health as well as chronic illness, self-care, mental health, and other interesting and educational topics. I'm the host, Misty Blue, a biomedical science major and a chronic illness warrior. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you love this episode. Welcome back to another episode. I'm so excited about today's guest, Savanna from HERBx. The HERBx is a platform that brings exclusive cannabis education and insight to the community. They are also a minority and women-owned organization. One quote that was featured on their Instagram is one of my favorites. Willie Nelson says, "I think people need to be educated to the fact that marijuana is not a drug. Marijuana is an herb and a flower." Thank you, Savanna, for joining me today to talk about cannabis. So please say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Savanna Riley. I am founder of the HERBx, which you explained it perfectly well. It was started last August, and of course, with COVID, we had to transition to a more digital background, but it was originally a host of panels and informational sessions with leaders of the industry to talk about a variety of topics such as like finance. We brought in buyers one time. Legislation is always a big one, and stigma is also a really big one as well. So thank you for having me on here today. I'm really excited.
Yes, I love the idea of talking about stigma. The stigmas of cannabis. We definitely have to touch base on that. But first, I want to know what inspired you to get involved in the cannabis industry.
So I have kind of an interesting backstory on this. I was never kind of like looking to be involved. I started working for a lobbying firm that actually lobbied for like the California Cannabis Manufacturers Association and a bunch of other ones. And so that was really, besides like trying it in college and high school, that was my only experience of it in the legal sense. And so I got more involved on the legislative side. And I was like, wow, this is super interesting, but there's so many regulations behind it. Like seeing the back end of it working, I was like, this is crazy. Taxes are crazy. Like regulation ever changing is crazy. So that's where it kind of sparked my interest. And then I got reached out to by a extract company to do sales and marketing. And so I kind of jumped ship and did that. And I always tell people it was like the scariest moment in your life is kind of when you do something that you don't really expect to do. And it's obviously at that point in time, cannabis was not a secure industry. It was definitely a gamble to leave a very stable job, in the legislative space to go into an industry that is still very much now developing. But I always tell people it was hands down the best decision I ever made.
Wow, I love that. So how was HERBx formed then?
So I made HERBx last August, and I just realized I'm originally from Sacramento. I'm in Los Angeles now, but in Sacramento, there wasn't really a event that brought together the wonderful community that the cannabis industry has. So with that, I also noted a lot of stigma behind the plant. So I thought that if I could bring together the community and also educate them on it, we could really overcome a lot of the stigma that is placed on it. So that began, we'd have a series of panel discussions, and the events just started to spring. People would get jobs from it. It was just crazy because one thing I found being in cannabis is we're all going through the same things. Like when a regulation changes, we all have to deal with that. Like we have to deal with changing our packaging. We have to deal with changing everything. And so I found that if you could create a space where everyone could kind of chat with each other and feel support in one end or another, it really helped out people move along with their businesses and their personal endeavors as well.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think community is so important, and you're kind of creating this safe community for people in the industry to connect. And I mean, that's really important, especially when this industry is fairly new, at least legally.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some common stigmas about marijuana?
So I've found, and I had a kind of like a similar discussion a few weeks ago on one of my panels, that I think a lot of the stigma developed around the language of it. Speaking with like baby boomers, like my dad. So my dad was a federal agent, so he would actually be the one that like propelled down into like fields of cannabis and be like, yeah, we're cutting this down, and he would like burn them. And so on one of our panels, when he told, because I had a huge industry leader. I had Kimberly Cargile on my panel, and you could just see her. She was like, oh my gosh, cut all that stuff down, because her background is working and growing. So when she said that, you could just see everyone in the audience just like cringe. But then he was like, I never really wanted to do it. He was like, it was just part of my job, which was really cool to kind of see where the stigma was developed from, because a lot of people don't really want to be doing the things that they're doing to the industry. They just end up having to do that because it's their job. So to go back on the stigma, I think language has a lot to do with it, because he would call it, it would kill me, he would call it pot, the reefer. And I was like, Dad, don't call it that. Even when he says marijuana, I'm like, no, call it cannabis. So I think a lot of the stigma developed around the language, and I'm a comms major, so I always pay more attention to that. But language really does have a place like in the industry. And until we kind of change how we describe it and our vocabulary towards it, I think if you use like pot or ganja, like it's always going to resort back to like
devil's lettuce.
Yeah, devil's lettuce. Oh my gosh. And I was like, that's another one my dad would say. And I was like, Dad, stop. Stop. You have to stop saying that. But it's so like ingrained in his brain of like how to say it that it's like pointless to try to change. I was like, if you can try to change it, cool. If not, I guess just like do your best, Yeah. But I think a lot comes in the form of stigma, comes like lack of education, lack of research. I noticed a few articles the other day that stated there was going to be more of a push for research, which I think is crazy, because you look at like the medical mushroom market, and they have a plethora of research, but yet a legal market like cannabis doesn't have it. It's a little confusing to me, but I think that's one way we can break it, is through education for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that's kind of what you do as well with HERBx, with the panels is, I feel like there's a lot of education with that. What I loved about the Willie Nelson quote is, what he was saying, that it's a flower, it's an herb. And I feel like that's another part of the stigma too, is that, when you're younger or back in the day, it was like, oh, they're on drugs. Drugs meant like,
yeah,
the devil's lettuce.
Totally. Yeah,
So,
no, I totally agree. Yes.
Now that it's like, for me, it's great medicine. And, I use a lot of other botanicals and herbs like in teas and that I incorporate in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think of medical marijuana or cannabis the same way. For me personally, I have chronic illnesses. So this plant can replace probably about 10 to 15 other medications that I would probably be on if I didn't have that. And then I don't have the side effects, So I think that's great. I love that. So so let's talk about mental health. Mental health was already an epidemic prior to the coronavirus, and even more so now. I was looking back at your November panel, and you were discussing cannabis wellness and mental health during COVID. Do you have any interesting points to sum up that conversation from November?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that when I think about the pandemic, I think about how cannabis was deemed an essential industry, which was, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like, this is just monumental, really, to be called that during something as such that's going on. A lot of the factors we touched on was, you're at home all day. You're working from home, which for me, I have a really hard time staring at a computer all day, but it's one of those things you like have to do it. So instead of like drinking, people are turning more to cannabis because it kind of eases you throughout the day, but you can still get things done. So I think that with health and mental wellness, it's personally for me, it's helped me a lot. It's in forms of wellness, just away from the pandemic. I got really ill a couple years ago, and the amount of medication I was prescribed was crazy. Like, I have a picture like holding all of the prescription bottles. I want to say I had like 11. And it was just each time it was like, oh, this isn't working here, I'll prescribe you something else. And that's I've always kind of struggled with sleep issues. So I've always kind of had this like reliance on sleeping pills. So once I got introduced to cannabis, I started substituting the pills for edibles at night, and it changed my sleep. I didn't wake up groggy. I didn't feel awful about myself, like feeling like I like have to have these pills. I'm so reliant on them to sleep. And It was crazy. It almost like switched out because I was still taking something, I think mentally, and then, but it wasn't as bad for me. So it was like a weird, almost like a placebo effect, I'd say, but it still helped me sleep and I didn't wake up feeling so awful. So that has helped me because I don't know what I'd be doing if I was still so like hooked on those, because it doesn't make you feel the best to know you're so reliant on something to do something as simple as sleep. So
well, and even at a young age, you know, when you think about it, that was what kind of scared me, is like, I'm like, well, what's the dose going to be like, you know, 5 years from now? How many am I going to have to take, you know, then, you know?
Yeah, no, to comment on that, when I would take the sleeping pills and I was like, oh, one's not working. And then I started taking two. And then I got to the point where I was like taking three and I was like, oh my gosh, like my tolerance, like you said, your tolerance for it'll just keep building. So then you'll just have to keep taking more, getting more prescriptions. And it's a domino effect, I'd say, for sure, with those. But I'm free of it now, so I'm very happy.
That's awesome. Yeah. And this isn't to shame anyone who has to take, you know, prescription medications,
Totally,
of
yeah.
course. It's just nice to know that you have an option to where, you know, like we were saying, like this flower can replace, you know, all these expensive prescription bottles, you know.
Totally. Yes.
And I love that.
Yeah,
So,
no, it was crazy.
so do you mind talking more about the illness that, or is that more, you can share that or keep that
Yeah,
if
no,
that's too
totally.
personal?
So there's really no, like, I still to this day have no explanation from my doctors. One day I just like could not get out of bed. Like I was laying there, I couldn't like physically like lift my head up. The sunlight hurt my eyes. Like
Wow.
I didn't go outside for probably like 4 months, I'd say. And that's like guessing on the shorter end of it. And like my parents were with me, and like everyone was worried. I'd go to the neurologist, I'd go do all these things, and like nothing was really helping me. Like I wasn't getting answers. I wasn't in at this point. I still was not physically able to, like when I was going to the doctor having to like sit up, like my parents would have to like help me like lift my head, and then I'd get in the car and it's just like everything was like blurry. Like it was the weirdest thing that still to this day I have no explanation for. I do
Wow.
know that what came with that were a lot of pharmaceuticals. Like a lot of drugs were prescribed to me, and I'm talking like sleeping pills, like antidepressants, painkillers, just anything, but nothing. Everything just made me feel worse. But then,
Mhm.
you trust these doctors to be giving you something that's going to help you, and then you end up just getting hooked on it, and you end up just almost getting worse. So I canceled all of that out. I stopped taking everything. I changed my diet. I went vegan. It was really hard. I still try not to eat that much meat to this day. I try to be because of what happened, I'm very cautious of my health. The weird thing about what happened is one day it just like suddenly I was fine. I still get offset symptoms like here and there where I'll have a day where I can't really like do the things I normally would be able to do, but it's definitely not as intense as it was back then. I still get like freaked out when I start getting headaches or like my vision gets blurry. I'm like, oh my God, like, is it coming back? Like, it's just so
Yeah.
terrifying to me. But I found like I just started exercising more. I was already eating pretty decently and I was exercising. So I just bumped that up more. And I found I started feeling better and I stopped taking all the pills and switched over to like cannabis. And it helps me a lot. There's no real way to explain exactly what happened. So I just kind of tell my story because I can't say like,
Yeah.
hey, I had X, Y, and Z. This is what you should do. I just hope that when I do tell my story, if there's somebody that has maybe had similar symptoms and it's just something that's what just happened to me, maybe that at least if it happens to somebody else, they'll know like, hey, you can like talk to me. Like I know what it's like. I know
Yeah.
what it's like to not have a doctor like tell you exactly what's wrong. Like I've sat in front of like 5 or 6 neurologists that have just been like, I don't know. Like I have no idea.
It's scary.
Especially
Yeah.
it's more scary just I guess the unknown of it is just not knowing really what there's no medical diagnosis. So it's like, oh, if it comes back, it's just going to be the same thing again. So it's a lot of
Right.
upkeep and figuring it out. And to go back on medical history, my dad was adopted, so I don't really have that background. I only have my mom's, and to my knowledge, there's nothing that's really happened there. So it's really, I'm like, oh, like, I wonder if it's like some hereditary or, it's just one of those things that you just learn to live with.
Yeah, I know for me personally, I didn't get my official diagnosis for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome until just a couple of years ago. I'm 36, so I guess I was like 33 maybe when I got that official diagnosis. So I would have a lot of crazy symptoms, and in all of my charts, it would just say she has a lot of unusual symptoms, and there's no. And for me, I was like, well, what? There's got to be a reason or a cause for that. So I know it can be really frustrating, and hopefully it's not anything you have to deal with again, and that it was just like a crazy fluke. But there's a huge community of people like you and people like us who have that unknown, so the best thing you can do really is just like be an advocate for yourself and
Totally.
So I have to know, what is your favorite strain?
So I didn't know this originally. So I'm a big OG girl. Like, I love that. It's my go-to. But I went to I went to Colorado I want to say like quite some time ago, but Oregon's regulations are a little bit, or not Oregon. Why do I keep saying that? I'm planning a trip to Oregon. So like my brain's all over the place. I planned a trip to Colorado, and my boyfriend and I went to Denver, and we were like, oh, obviously while we're here, we have to hit the dispensaries.
Yes.
So we went to one, and he got orange cream, or I think it was like orange sherbet and orange peel. And it was so good. Like, to this day, I was like, that's my new favorite strain. Like, the terpenes in it were like perfect. Like, it encompassed the flavor. And I was like, oh my gosh, it literally tastes so good. Like, I don't know how they did that. So to answer your question, it's that one. Orange peel.
I love it. I've been to Denver, I think twice, and I loved it. I don't know if I tried that one though, but Denver's cool.
Yeah, it was weird going there from California because they like pulled out the weed from jars, and I was like, oh, that's a no-no in California. Like,
oh, really?
So
what is it like in California?
So California, everything has to be, all the packaging has to be child-proof, and it has to be compliant with obviously like the industry regulations. So as far as like having jars of weed and then like pulling it out and weighing it, you can't do that. That's illegal. That's basically like a black market type thing here. Everything has to be seed to sale. So every single thing you buy has to have like a batch number on it. It's super intense, but yeah, it's a total
pain, sense.
But yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites that I get from the dispensary is Papa's Herbs. Have you heard of Papa's Herb?
I don't think so.
It's good. It's, so I the one I'm trying now, it's a hybrid. It's called Wedding Cake, but my favorite with them is an indica. I prefer indicas, and it's a forbidden fruit. It's really good too.
Ooh, forbidden fruit. Anything that's like fruity or like citrusy, I like love. I'm like, oh, this is so good. Because it's crazy that you can like taste, because I know that like when you use vapes, like a lot of it's like the ingredients aren't usually natural. Well, not speaking for all of them, but some like have really saturated like flavoring where you can taste that it's like flavored, and it's like not natural terpene flavors. So when you go over and like you have flower, like actual flower, and you smoke it and it like tastes like orange peel or like forbidden fruit, you're like, oh my God, this is so good. It's like dessert.
Yes. Yeah, I really wanted to do a California trip. Like, that was kind of in the plan or in the works for a while, but then with coronavirus, I don't know when I'll be able to get out there, but hopefully in the future, because I still haven't done.
Come visit.
Yeah, I haven't had the experience there yet, so I'm looking forward to that. So I know that your events have transitioned to online due to the pandemic, which is cool because it offers a unique and safe experience to the viewers. Can you tell me more about the events and how listeners can be a part of this digital space?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I actually recently just made this change. Instead of panels, because we've brought on speakers that have just so much expertise, and I found that an hour sometimes isn't enough time for all 3 or 4 of them to really go over in depth their knowledge of the topic. So I've switched over to doing more of a speaker series. So it's going to be one-on-one conversations with leaders in the industry or people specializing in the topic. and really go in depth and dive into the details that they have on it. That way viewers can get more information that's all in one place versus listening to an entire panel and having to like go to one part or another part and listen to that specifically. Because I know a lot of the speakers that come on, I sometimes don't feel like they have enough time to really talk, and sometimes people talk over and so on and so forth. So I've switched over to doing mostly that, and so I can transition to a more podcast format, because I've seen a lot of people traveling lately, not necessarily to go like visit people, but just in general, like taking road trips. So I was like, oh, maybe I can, get more of an audience and make it easier for the audience we already have to listen to the information by just doing like singular talks and one-offs instead of listening to three people talk over each other. So I've switched into that. And then I'm also working on a project. I haven't really decided if I'm going to do it with HERBx yet or make it completely separate, but I'm developing a platform for social equity applicants, people of or BIPOC, and then women-owned businesses. I found that a lot of the social equity programs or any like city or state funded programs, they give the applicants the money, but they don't really teach them how to start their business. And having started a few myself, I know it is such a pain to go through like the legal process. Like, what do I do after I incorporate? Who do I incorporate with? Who do I file with? There's so many moving parts to it.
Yeah.
So I'm creating almost like I wouldn't say it's like a university, but I'm developing out a curriculum. And then I'm bringing on speakers to kind of talk about like the topics of like, say, if you need an attorney, I'll have an attorney listed online and you can get a free consultation with them and then move on from there, deciding whatever you want to do. Or I'm working with vendors to get discounts on like incorporating services or accounting services for these people so that they can get on and they can start a functioning and legal cannabis business without trying to go to like 10 different websites and figure it out. So the portal is all in one place. So
Wow.
that's been one of the big things I've been working on lately. But kind of the reason why I switched HERBx to more of a one-on-one setting, because it honestly is a lot easier to deal with one person's schedule versus three. So that also alleviates me from doing that as well. But when things do pick back up and we can see people in person again and network, I'm really excited to bring the panels back, because I think the live personal perspective of like the panels are so important, because then people can network and talk afterwards. So that's just a few of the things I've been working on as far as in the cannabis space. So yeah.
I love that. So can anyone listening to this join in on the panel, or to listen or watch or learn, or even be a part of it and speak? How does that work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always tell anyone associated with the cannabis industry, just email me and I'd love to chat with you. I mean, everyone has such a special story, even if it's your own personal journey through the cannabis space and you don't even have a business. I think that it's important to put that information out there for people to listen to. I mean, for Jimmy's podcast, for example, a lot of people, I didn't even know that was a thing until I talked to Jimmy. So a lot of people out there that maybe have that same issue can now be like, oh, wow, like I'm not alone. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that the more we spread information, the better it is for really everybody. Because now in these virtual and digital days, you can go online and look up almost anything. So I think the more information out there, the better. But yeah, if anyone is interested, email me, text me, call me. I don't care. I'm very available always. So I'd love to talk to anybody.
I love that. And all of your email and all your information is going to be in a blog post that will be in the show notes. So if anyone wants to find those links, you can find that on my website, which will be in the notes. So before we wrap up, I figured in case anyone's listening who maybe isn't very familiar with cannabis and maybe they want to learn, we can discuss just a few little things, I guess. So like, is there anything that you would want to share that for someone who's interested in, that might be educational? So like for me, for example, something that I feel like a lot of people don't know are like the different strains and what they're for. So, sativa, That will give you a lot more alertness. Whereas indica, where they say couch, can make you more like mellow and rested, and hybrid, of course, is kind of a combination of the two. So do you have any little for FYI, like 411 on a couple things that you can share?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with all of that. I'm not much of a sativa smoker. I love hybrids and I love indicas, because indicas for my sleeping, and then hybrids if I'm just like wanting to hang out and be in a good mood. I'm like, usually if I'm like in a bad mood during the day and I have like a ton of meetings lined up or something, or I'm just tired, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna smoke a hybrid because it makes me like really happy, and I have a lot more patience, which is always good throughout the workday. I
Yes.
do always say that when people will like DM me or whatever it may be, and they say, like, how much should I take? And it's always such a double-edged sword, because I always say start with less and then you can take more from there, because you really can't go back. And I always say, like, everybody's body is different. So like when you take something, it might not affect you the same way as it might affect someone else. And I think the best way to learn how your body reacts is by your own experience. But always do your research on what you're buying. Like, different strains can affect you differently as well. So always do your research on that. I think the dosage thing is always like my big go-to for like new users and information to the industry, because it does affect everyone so differently. So to always be careful and cognizant of that, and that cannabis is awesome. Like it's so awesome. Like it doesn't hurt anybody. It just makes you happy. So just if you're nervous to try it, maybe do it with a friend that already has done it. I always find that friends are like kind of the best entry into it if you're kind of nervous to do it, and just have someone there. It's not as scary as people really make it seem. So I know that the who was it? The United Nations marked it off of their list of like deadly substances, which was crazy. I was like, how did you guys do that before the US? But whatever, So really cool stuff. Give it a try. It's very helpful. It's helped a lot of people mentally and with their health. So definitely give it a shot.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of different ways you can have cannabis. You can take it through a tincture, through edibles, cartridges, inhalation. And then, of course, there's topical. So there's so many different formats of it. I feel like a lot of people who are afraid of it because they have poor experiences in the past is because
Totally.
they tried who knows what from back in someone's little baggie back in the day, which kind of adds to the stigma. And now, of course, you can kind of find things, a strain that is more what you're looking for. And so that's, again, where education is important too. So if and that's what's great about having it legal now, is that it's like, there's just so much more information on it. They have the percentage,
Totally.
the strain, where it's from, all of that good stuff. So I always say for people who the main thing I hear is people had like a panic attack after trying it for the first time.
Edibles.
And yeah. And honestly, I feel like that could be for a few different reasons. Number one, because possibly you had too much. And then number two, I feel like sometimes the sativas can do that for some people. That's why I avoid sativas, because I feel like it makes me more amped up and I want to be the opposite. Like I need to chill.
Exactly.
So,
I'm like the same thing on sativas. I'm very like intense. I'm like almost like
yes.
paranoid, but that's just, I know a lot of people that take it and they're like, oh, I'm so productive. So that just goes into showing that like it affects everyone differently. Just like I think it's worth to discuss how different forms of consumption can affect you differently. Like I know for me, we've all had that edible story, unfortunately. Like we've all had it. Like it sucks, but like I think that was before I tried edibles. That was my fear, because I had a friend that made some brownies, like I want to say it was in high school, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a panic and my heart is beating through my ribs, like terrified. But people also have to remember, this was back when like your friends aren't measuring how much you're going in there, they're just making it. So you could have had like 200 milligrams and not even known it.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's fair to say, like, edibles, yes, they definitely hit you a lot differently than per se vaping or smoking. Smoking, I found, it eases you into it more. It's not as like intense and it doesn't last as long. Whereas once you take an edible, it's kind of it.
You're in for the
You better
ride.
hope you better hope you took the right amount. But at the same time, like, smoking doesn't help me sleep, but edibles do. So it just kind of depends. I think vaping's the same as smoking. And then tinctures, I think tinctures have always worked for me as more of like an edible feel. I get in my body, anything you kind of consume, that's just how it's going to affect you versus like inhaling it. But it's always worth it to try. I know that there's a lot of like lotions now. There's body washes. I know the body washes are great. They will get you crazy high because you're in the shower, so your like pores are open. So
Oh, I
the
didn't know about
THC just like soaks in.
that.
Yeah, I'll have to send you all this
That's
stuff. There's like
cool.
bath bombs now. Bath bombs are awesome. They're my favorite. But I always say if you're looking for relaxation, look for a good like 1-to-1 or 18-to-1 of like CBD and THC, and then like work your way into it. I
Absolutely,
got
yeah.
my mom to try like, have you heard of Papa and Barkley?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I'll
I'll
send
have
you
to
that
check
too.
it out.
They're awesome. I mean, and I've worked a lot in marketing everywhere from their branding to just their product is incredible. It's basically like oil, like not a massage oil, but it's like when you're sore, like an icy hot, you rub it on like where you're sore and stuff, and it just works so well. And you don't get high, it just relaxes your muscles so you're not sore anymore. So there's so
It's
many forms
cool.
of like indirect consumption that you can still do that's like crazy. It's for everybody.
Yeah, I have like a CBD apothecary line, but we can only do CBD products. And then in Florida, it's kind of they're still sort of easing into, like, we just now got edibles, and so they don't really have a
Oh,
lot
okay.
of like the beauty, like wellness type products yet. But I know in Denver they had more. When I went to Denver, they had more stuff like that, like the bath bombs and things like that. So it's really cool, just
Yeah,
like how much it is expanding and growing, and there's a lot of cool things to try for sure.
totally. You would love the California market. There's
I
so much
know.
here. I mean, from beauty, like they have this one brand I used to work with. They created like a what's it called? The stuff you put on before, the primer. They created a
Yeah.
primer, like CBD primer. I was like,
Wow.
I'm losing my mind. This is so crazy. But you
So
would like, the
cool.
cosmetic market here is crazy with it. So you would love it. You have to visit. It's really
I
expensive though,
will.
but you'll still love it.
I know. Well, I was originally born in Riverside, so I lived in California until I was
Oh,
about
cool.
9 or so. And I visited a couple times, but not since the cannabis industry has blown up. So I will definitely
Yeah.
come visit someday soon.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun out here.
Yes. So go ahead and let's wrap up and share how people can find you. And of course, like I said, I'll have that listed in the blog post on bluedreamhealth.com.
Sure, yeah. So I can give you my personal and HERBx's. So our Instagram is at HERBx. Usually that's like the best way to reach me on that platform because you can just DM me and I check it like every hour. So I'm very responsive. So if you want to reach out to me there, it's at the HERBx. So TheHERBx. And then if you want to reach out to my personal, you can always email me at Savanna. So it's Savanna at simplyr.us, but it's simplyr.us. It spells a little different. And then if you want to reach out to me on my personal, it's at Sav Riley at SAVRILEY. I'm not used to like spelling out stuff yet for podcasts. So weird.
Same.
I'm
Well,
like, that's why I'm like thinking about it.
no, mine's weird too because I'm Misty MISTI and then Blue BLU, so I have to do the same thing.
Yeah. So
Spelling it out.
eventually one day I'll get it used to it, but for now.
And then I went to your website and it's so cool. I
Oh,
love how
thank
it's like laid out. It's
you.
very different. So everyone should definitely go check it out. It's really interesting. I love how it's like laid out and stuff. Very cool.
I was trying to make it for a while. I feel like I was trying to make it too confusing. And then I was like, oh, like what does everyone have? They all have a desktop. So I was like, this would be very user friendly.
So
So,
cool.
so yeah, check it out. I spent a lot of time on it. So please look
Wow.
at it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We definitely have to do this again. We'll definitely have
Yeah,
to have you
definitely.
back, and maybe we can have you and Jimmy on here, or I don't know, we'll make it
Yeah,
fun.
that'd be
And
fun.
yeah,
Definitely, always down for that anytime. Thank you so much for having this platform. I think it's so important to have, and I applaud you. I know
yes.
all the work that it is taken behind it. So it's amazing. Thank you and great job.
Thank you. Please be sure that you subscribe to the blog, which is bluedreamhealth.com, where you can find additional links and information on this episode. You can also check out the digital magazine on our website, as well as find us on Patreon, where you can be a supporter.